In part 1, we established something uncomfortable. After a first investing loss, investors split into two groups, retreaters and learners. And the retreaters almost never know they're retreating. But I promised you a number, a specific dollar amount that this behavioral split costs you over a lifetime. And that's exactly where we're starting. Okay, this is where it gets really interesting. Let's say you're 28 years old. You put $10,000 into the market. The market drops 35%, which, by the way, is roughly what happened in early 2020 and again in 2022. And your $10,000 becomes $6,500. You panic, you sell, you lock in that $3,500 loss, and you stay in cash for 18 months, waiting for things to stabilize. Here's what that decision actually costs you. JP Morgan Asset Management publishes a study every year called The Guide to Retirement. One of the most cited findings in that study shows that if you missed just the 10 best days in the S&P 500 over the last 20 years, your annual return dropped from 9.8% to 5.5%. 10 days out of roughly 5,000 trading days. And here's the brutal part. 6 of those 10 best days occurred within 2 weeks of the 10 worst days, meaning the best returns almost always come right after the scariest moments. The investors who sold during the crash missed the recovery. So back to our 28-year-old. They're out of the market for 18 months. They miss part of the recovery. They get back in when things feel safer, meaning higher. And by the time they retire at 65, that one behavioral response to one loss costs them approximately $47,000 in compounded returns. Not the loss itself, the reaction to the loss. Fidelity analyzed which of their customers had the best investment returns over a 10-year period. The top performers fell into 2 categories: people who had forgotten they had the account and people who had died. Literally. The best investing strategy Fidelity's own data could identify was do nothing, which means every time you react to a loss, you are actively working against your own best interest. Okay, so we've established that the reaction to the loss is more expensive than the loss itself, that the investors who stay out of the market, waiting for safe conditions, are quietly falling further behind every single month. So why? Given that this information is available, given that the math is clear, why do smart people still retreat? Here's what I've come to believe after spending a lot of time thinking about this. It's not that people don't know the right move intellectually. It's that the loss attached itself to their identity. It stopped being, I made a bad investment, and became, I am bad at investing. And you can't fix a strategy you've confused with your personality. That's the real thing a first loss is trying to show you. Not that you should stop, but what specifically went wrong, and whether you're willing to look at it. Think of it like this. Imagine you're learning to drive. You take a corner too fast, the car slides a little, your heart jumps into your throat. That moment, that terrifying half second, teaches you more about how a car handles than 100 hours of driving calmly in a parking lot. It's information. It's calibration. It tells you exactly where your limits are. A first investing loss does the same thing. It tells you things about yourself that you genuinely could not have known before it happened. It tells you your actual risk tolerance. Not the one you wrote down on the questionnaire when you opened your Procreate account, but the real one. The one that exists at 2 a.m. when you're watching your balance go down and you can't sleep. It tells you whether you actually understood what you invested in. Because if you owned something and had no idea why it was falling, that's not bad luck. That's a gap in knowledge that the loss just made visible. It tells you whether your investment thesis was based on research or on vibes. Did you buy it because of fundamentals or because someone on Reddit said it was going to the moon? And here's the thing. Every one of those pieces of information is extraordinarily valuable if you're willing to look at them honestly instead of just feeling bad and walking away. Right now, without overthinking it, when you lost money, did you actually know why the investment was falling? Not a guess, not the market was bad. Did you understand the specific reason? Because the answer to that question tells you everything about whether the loss was bad luck or a knowledge gap. And those two things require completely different responses. This is the part I find most fascinating and most frustrating because it's so well documented in behavioral economics and so completely ignored in mainstream finance content. There's a concept called loss aversion, identified by Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky. They won a Nobel Prize for this work. The finding is that losses feel psychologically about twice as painful as equivalent gains feel good. So losing $1,000 hurts roughly twice as much as gaining $1,000 feels good. This means that after a first significant investing loss, your brain is experiencing something closer to grief than disappointment. The emotional weight of it is disproportionate to the actual financial damage, and a brain in that state makes terrible long-term decisions. Here's the specific pattern that plays out most often. The investor loses money. They feel the pain, which is amplified by loss aversion. They create a story to explain the loss. The market is rigged. I'm not smart enough for this. Investing is basically gambling. And that story, which feels completely rational because it was written during real emotional pain, becomes the lens through which they make every investing decision for the next 5 to 10 years. That story is what costs them the $47,000, not the original loss. Now, you might be thinking, okay, Nick, but what if the lesson from the loss actually is that I shouldn't be in individual stocks? What if the right response is to be more conservative? And look, that is a completely valid takeaway, genuinely. If your first loss came from picking individual stocks and the lesson you took was, I should be in index funds instead, that is a good lesson. That is the loss working correctly. The difference is between a lesson and a retreat. A lesson changes your strategy. A retreat abandons the game entirely. Here's something that sounds wrong, but is supported by the data. The investors most likely to make catastrophic long-term mistakes are not the ones who have lost money. They're the ones who haven't. Yet. Because investors who have never experienced a significant loss have never had their real risk tolerance tested. They think they can handle a 40% drop. They have no idea. And when it finally happens, usually with a much larger amount of money, they have no emotional framework to respond to it. The first loss is protective. The problem is most people don't treat it that way. So now you understand the psychology, why the brain retreats, why smart people make the wrong call, why the story you tell yourself after the loss matters more than the loss itself. But understanding it and knowing exactly what to do about it, those are two different things. In part 3, I'm going to give you the exact 3 moves that separate the learners from everyone else. Specific, actionable. Things you can do this week. It's already up. See you there.